It feels like it's been forever since I was writing about The Last of Us, but here I am again, another season of television in. If you missed it, I did a video covering both games and the first season. A link to the playlist with all of them is down below. But if you know me, I'm a pretty big fan of The Last of Us. I mean, this is not for the video. This is permanent. The Last of Us Part 2 specifically is one of the most impactful video games to me and one of my favorite stories. And I waxed poetically about it for like an hour in my last video. So needless to say, I was curious and nervous to see how in the world you would try to adapt this very video game-centric story to a show. So this Pride Month, which I suppose this video is somewhat on theme for since it does feature the gays sometimes in funny ways, we're going to be talking about Season 2 of The Last of Us, the HBO original show.
If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything that I've found here, I've not found by myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed to make this man of me. All my stolen missing parts I've no need for anymore.
The big thing on everyone's mind coming into this is the fact that adapting this game almost just sounds like a bad idea straight up. As I covered in my previous video about the first season, even adapting the first game was barely a good idea, since most of the story of the game was just kind of traveling and not really a whole lot of plot-dense material to make an interesting season of television. But even though Part 2 has a lot more direct plot, it's a lot longer of a game and it plays its plot twice over by changing character perspectives. And on top of that, what thematically works so well for me about Part 2 is the fact that it weaponizes its game mechanics for thematic reasons, making the increased brutality and realism of the actions of Ellie and Abby, and the pre-established love for Joel as a character, to drive the player to do increasingly worse things as Ellie without even thinking about it, before the game actually asks you questions of, is any of what you did as a video game worth it? It's visceral and it's messy and at times incredibly sweet and human, and it does this by not just being a playable movie, but by being an honest-to-God video game. And one of the best feeling to play and most emotionally thoughtful ones I personally have ever seen. I know I'm partially in the minority about my love for Part 2, but these reasons that I like it make it a big question in my mind as why you'd even want to adapt it into a TV show. It definitely makes sense for the first season from a money-making perspective. The Last of Us is over a decade old now, and a lot of the world has changed, so giving a new take on the story with maybe some fresh perspectives and creative minds, it makes sense, especially being that PlayStation continues to try and make shows and movies off of their stuff. Not that that's what the show ended up being, but like, the logic follows. Part 2 is 5 years old at this point and feels pretty fresh on the Sony Naughty Dog game scene because they've done so little since. And the one thing that has come up in the time since the release, the show literally refuses to acknowledge. You see, over the last couple of years, the war and genocide raging on between Israel and Palestine has become increasingly bleak and incredibly sickening to see unfold. And it's no secret that Neil Druckmann, writer, game designer, and director of The Last of Us, Uncharted, and he also worked on the Jak and Daxter series, who is also the co-creator of the show, is Jewish, and has commented before that he put a lot of history between the conflict of the Israeli people and the Palestinians into the subtext that's going on, especially in The Last of Us Part 2. This is something that I'm not the best person to comment on in terms of how well this subtext is executed or what perspectives Neil even is putting into it. I'm not one to fully condemn what I've seen from Druckmann in online stuff, but I certainly feel like we don't totally agree on stuff going on with Israel right now, but that's not really the point. The point is you can definitely see the conflict mirrored in stuff like the scars and the wolves, for however you take that. And Dina, one of my favorite characters in the series, is also explicitly Jewish and talks about her heritage in a really great personal feeling set piece in the synagogue in the game. So at the very least, with this baggage attached to the story, you'd think they'd do something, literally anything, in the show to address the conflict, or even Zionism or Judaism, which again are not the same things, but instead they mostly just ignore it, dropping as much that was already in there, even dropping mentioning that Dina is Jewish at all and the synagogue set piece altogether. And that really disappointed me. Not only because it takes away a layer from Dina's character that I think was very important for her, so essentially erasing some of the Jewish identity in the show, but also feeling like it's afraid to make any kind of comment one way or another towards the clear subtext in the writing, besides like, oh, just both sides are violent, which has become increasingly apparent just isn't the full story and is essentially a harmful stance in the face of this mass violence. There's hardly any Palestine left. But to be fair, I don't expect this video game TV show to be like the greatest political statement of all time, nor do I expect massive corporations like Sony, Discovery, or Naughty Dog to make statements in support of Palestine, given America. However, the omission of all mention of it entirely feels to me like a bad sign in terms of what the creative team is willing to do more with this material, or make any kind of artistic or emotional statement that differs from the original game. In that case, how can it really be great? But this is all just kind of initial concerns with the show. So let's now talk about the show itself and how it met my expectations, or in some ways, drastically failed them. It is 3D printed. It doesn't, it was loud. It doesn't stay up. Yeah, I went as Ellie to DragonCon. That's why I have all this. This wasn't inherently all for, that's why this is Peacetide. This wasn't all for the video, but I thought it would be fun to break it out because I really like Ellie. So yeah. So the writing is what I would describe as constrained. It really feels like throughout the entire runtime that they felt the pressure of the length of the game, and that they were desperately trying to fit it into 7 hours of television, at least the first half of the game. And they have such limited time that some of their changes that they went to make later on ends up having kind of drastic consequences at the beginning of the show, which ends up being way worse because of it. For the biggest example of how these changes ended up hurting the beginning of the show, let's talk about the first couple episodes of the show and how they differ from the game and why. So the first episode is pretty inoffensive and pretty uninteresting too, in my opinion. There are some slight changes and things they cut out, and they set up Abby's backstory kind of immediately, which takes a little bit away from the surprise and tension of like what she's doing and why she's there, but it's fine. It's not really anything crazy. But one of the changes that stood out to me was the fact that they changed Eugene's death to having Joel kill him. And this would turn out to be very important for a number of reasons we'll see later. You immediately feel the fallout of this line of changes as in episode 2, when in the game, Dina and Ellie go off on a patrol together, stumble on Eugene's hideout where he grows plants, and have a real foundational conversation for their relationship and the first sex scene of the game. That's all gone. This isn't just me being like, oh, my two girls together, romantic, happy. No, this is like an important scene to set up Ellie and Dina's dynamic, as well as a lot of the backstory of Ellie's life since the last game and the overall themes of the game in general. The conversation focuses around Ellie's tattoo, what she's been experiencing, and really explains why Dina would want to go with Ellie in the first place. But in Season 2, Episode 2, this is completely cut out, as Ellie ends up going on patrol with Jesse because they felt like they needed more time to work on Jesse's character while he's still there. And also, they completely changed the setup of Eugene to where it doesn't focus around that. And instead of stumbling on Eugene's old place, Jesse and Ellie have a conversation about Eugene's death to build tension on Ellie's relationship to Joel and the guilt alongside that. Which this change is like, it's okay, alright? They cut out one of my favorite scenes from the early on game, but they're trying to focus on different things. It's fine, whatever. There's still a lot of runtime left in this episode. It's not just this one scene. And yet, In the episode, they spend almost no time doing any other character building with Ellie and Dina, or Ellie and Jesse, or Dina and Jesse. They don't really spend any time together in the entire episode. Then later on, in episode 6 out of 7, you finally get the payoff for this weird change in setup. Episode 6 is kind of the big flashback episode of the story, showing you Ellie and Joel's final conversation on the porch, as well as the birthday celebration at the museum, which is all like really good stuff. This is actually one of the best episodes of the season. But you get an entire 20-ish minute chunk out of the episode that's Ellie going out on patrol for the first time, and them running into Eugene, who has recently been infected, and playing out a story showing that Joel will lie to try and comfort people, and will kill with no hesitation to protect people he loves, even if it's against the party's will. Which again is fine. I think it actually works pretty well emotionally, the actors really blow it out of the water, but this is kind of something that we already know about Joel, or at least it's something that's supposed to be set up in the entire first season. That's like what Joel's character is about. Now they don't handle it that well in the first season. They go really weirdly on trying to be sympathetic to Joel. We'd at least think we'd see something from Tommy, seeing Tommy's more violent moments and stories about what he and Joel did to survive. But this just isn't present in the season because they didn't seem to want to take the time. So to execute this scene that they wanted 4 episodes later, which works moderately well to set up something that we should already have known about Joel, we end up sacrificing one of my opinion, the most important scenes in the early game. And it all feels so crunched together. And this is just the constant feeling throughout the show, that they were really struggling to know how to pace this stuff out and how to split it into 2 seasons comfortably. Because they also sprinkle in a lot more about Abby's storyline in this season, and I can't for the life of me figure out why. I think it was just to keep intrigue up and because people know so much about Abby, so you have just enough questions about the Scars and Isaac and whatever they have going on to try and really make sure people come back for the next season, which granted isn't something the game had to worry about. But I really feel like this doesn't add much to the storyline, and again, instead just bogs down the runtime for how little time they already have. And I truly think that the major cliffhanger at the end of where the first season breaks would have carried audiences over to season 3. But who knows? What I do know is the fact that it took them about 6 hours, or about 5 episodes, for Ellie to actually kill one of the members of the group that killed Joel. And again, there are only 7 episodes, and episode 6 is all flashbacks. Despite the story having a lot more forward momentum than the first season, the feeling by the end of the season is that not really that much has happened, because really not that much has happened. And within that runtime, there is also a fair amount of new stuff, which is what I was really excited about. It's kind of hard to criticize this show, and especially to write a video essay about the show, without just framing the whole thing through the lens of what it did and didn't do from the game because of the nature of adaptation and how close it is to the original, and even the fact that it has a lot of the same creative team, and, you know, just the era of movie making we're in general. But this isn't really my favorite thing to do in terms of discussion because it feels like it's minimizing this as a standalone piece of art. But like I said in my video on season 1, one of the things that can really make this stand out and direct comparison is when it decides to do completely new stuff, exploring aspects that are completely unique to the TV show. This was the best part about season 1 with the Nick Offerman episode. And while the story offers a lot less space for them to make those kinds of changes and additions, there are still several new scenes and moments along the way, some of which I really enjoyed. But before I get to the ones I enjoyed, let me talk really quick about what I like to call the Siege of Jackson, since it ties into my first complaint I had about the writing being constrained with Eugene in episode 2. Because you see, like I said, there was still plenty of runtime in that episode to set up Ellie and Dina, so why not just, you know, add something different? It would have been fine. Well, it's because so much of that episode's runtime was being used by a new addition to the story that may be the stupidest thing any of these writers have ever done, in my opinion. Remember, in the original game, at the beginning, Abby goes off on her own to look for Joel and stumbles upon a bunch of frozen infected, acting as kind of a tutorial section teaching you stealth and the new hand-to-hand combat system that you have as Ellie, as well as propelling Abby right into Joel and Tommy for their confrontation. Well, they decided to change that and make it even bigger, even bolder, and even stupider. Instead of just being a horde that Joel, Tommy, and Abby fend off together, they have it be the biggest horde we've ever seen in the show, and they have the infected end up trying to lead a full-scale attack on Jackson. This is so bad and dumb, and here are some of the reasons why it's bad and dumb. 1. It takes up way too much of the runtime. Most of the episode is literally just this. It seriously hurts the pacing of the entire beginning of the show so much. 2. It directly takes away from the characters and building emotional moments for instead just big zombie gun shootout hundreds dead. 3. It makes the story more confusing as Joel's death is now paired with the death of hundreds of other people and the entire destruction of the town. It really makes his individual death a lot less impactful and a lot more ridiculous for Ellie to try and convince other people to go after them when they're literally completely rebuilding the town from this massive attack, which I know is like kind of the point of why they did it. They wanted to show it as a negative that Ellie was really trying to do this, but I don't know, it just doesn't work for me. And especially when Tommy and Jesse leave later, it feels even more out of character for how these people have been set up in the show. Tommy is way less rough around the edges in the show, way less morally questionable, and Jesse is even more so set up as the straight arrow who is supposed to take over Jackson someday. And you're telling me that both of them left Jackson, leaving it absent of at least like 5 super important people for its safety and infrastructure? But 4, and honestly most importantly, it's boring. It's not personal to anyone who we care about. We care about Joel, Ellie, and kind of Tommy at this point in the story. And you're taking this much of the runtime for boring mass violence and shootouts which don't add anything character-wise to the story at all, and don't even include most of our main characters? What were they thinking? I was practically yelling at my TV while this was happening, and I put it in my notes that this is somehow more video game writing pilled than the actual video game, sacrificing slow character moments for over-the-top action violence. There's nothing that justifies this change for me. It never leads to anything more important as the show goes on. This is genuinely the worst moment of the entire show, and it happens in episode 2. But let's quickly talk about some of the additions and writing choices that I did like, because I didn't outright hate this show. I loved the additions during the flashback episode of all the birthdays. They really kind of flesh out more of Joel and Ellie's relationship in a way we've never seen, as well as showing a deeper side to Joel's more conservative upbringing and beliefs that Ellie challenges. These are fantastic and emotionally work super well. It's easily one of the best things the show has done for The Last of Us canon. Seth's whole character being a lot more important is also awesome. I love it. First of all, having him be one of the only people to support Ellie's quest for revenge is a really smart thematic decision, forcing Ellie to compromise her personal beliefs and work with someone who is actively hateful towards her for her sexuality, and it plays super well into the revenge being part of learned violence from Joel that Ellie has to come to terms with throughout the course of the story. Every time Seth was on screen, I felt like the writers actually knew what they wanted to say and were doing something unique to try and add depth to the story. He was genuinely a real highlight for me that I wasn't expecting. The therapist stuff I also didn't hate. I thought it was a bit clunky of a way for them to work in more of the inner struggles of Joel. Again, feeling a little bit like video game writing, not TV writing, but still, for what they are, I think they added some important and interesting aspects to Joel, and I love seeing Catherine O'Hara here. She's always great. For as much as I think it's out of place for this season, I liked what they were doing to add depth to the conflict between the wolves and the scars. I like that Ellie doesn't lose her shit when she finds out that Dina is pregnant, though it also plays into a big issue that I'll get into in the next section. I liked when Ellie listened to Love Buzz by Nirvana. I love Bleach, and I like Ellie. I like when we see Costco. We didn't get Costco in the game. And I mean, Grover. So we get all my favorite things. Nirvana, Muppets and everyone's favorite big warehouse business, Costco. Those are all new additions to The Last of Us canon. So yeah, I mean, overall, just not a lot of new additions that I love, or really new additions in general. They do hit a lot of the major things that I really love about the original game pretty well. It just feels like a lot of their writing decisions, like in the first season, make the episodes and the overall season so much more rigid and rough than the video game counterparts, by focusing on stuff that may not have been the most interesting, especially for audiences not already familiar with the story. But the last major thing I want to talk about before I try to wrap this rambliness up into some kind of cohesive thesis is the characters. Now, I won't spend too much time on this. I could go off ranting again about how I didn't like Joel's characterization, or how Tommy is also handled very strangely because of it, but I really don't want to do that. There are really only two people I want to talk about for this, and they are Ellie and Dina, because they are handled strangely. I already talked a little bit about it with my sadness from what they cut out from Dina's character, but Dina all around plays a really weird role in the show, with strange changes to almost distance her more from Ellie, like her going back to Jesse after Joel gets killed, and not knowing if she actually likes girls or not, that just kind of feel pointless and take away from some of the feeling of the story being somewhat about queer people trying to get rid of their previous conservative ideology, but also just in the way that she navigates the story and relates to Ellie. Dina in the show is always positive. Nothing keeps her down. She shows like the smallest bit of a crack when Joel dies, of course, but outside of that, she's just super upbeat about literally everything. And despite being given a little bit more agency for her character in the show's plot, she ends up feeling a lot more flat because of stuff like being pregnant and all of these things that they have to face around the journey that she just is completely positive about, no matter what, almost. Even finding out Ellie is immune and sleeping with Ellie, she mostly will come out of them immediately after with a calm and chipper disposition, always backing Ellie. For example, the kiss conversation in the tents when they first leave and go after Abby. They just immediately bounce back from Abby killing Joel to having a junior version of the scene that they cut in Eugene's place, but the tone and reactions of the characters come off as way weird because they just don't seem that sad or even mad about Joel's death. Again, I'm not really 100% sure why Show Dina decides to back up Ellie in going, let alone go with her, other than she's got a crush on her, and they kind of set up Joel being a bit closer to Dina than they were in the game, but you certainly don't feel that layer of personal stakes from the way Dina behaves. And to justify this, they try and add this speech about the first person Dina ever killed, playing into a theme that I've talked about a lot lately that has become more present as conservatism and fascism are on the rise again in America, which is screw everybody but family. Go to the ends of the earth, even kill for to protect your family, but anyone outside of that family is worthless and an enemy in a second if you feel like they're a threat to your family. Which is okay. This is part of what the game is criticizing, part of the ideology the show and game are going after, and could add an interesting level to Dina's character, making her a bit more problematic of a character than in the game, and I think that's good because of the conclusion of all this, and the fact that what they're doing is objectively wrong. But the character then flip-flops right back to just being chipper and having banter with Ellie. And this exact problem of characterization affects Ellie just as much as Dina, making Ellie a much more pleasant character to sit with in the show and a lot less angry. You occasionally see very brief glimpses that she definitely is angry and sad, but mainly just in the super extreme moments, like the first scene where she tortures someone. Again, a super important scene that lands really well in the show, but we have that Ellie with an Ellie that hears Dina is pregnant and is just like, wow, that's sick, nice, nice, instead of the very selfish and angry and real reaction that Ellie had in the game. Game Ellie is prepared to go to the ends of the earth to track down Abby, and she does. And the moment that Dina gets in the way of that, she cuts her off because she can't let herself lose the anger she's holding on to, or she'll have to face her loss. So everything else has to not matter, even when it does. That's how we get moments like Ellie killing Mel, where the pure anger and focus of what Ellie is doing blows back at the player. But here, Ellie and Dina just have such good chemistry and are just super upbeat and unurgent about things that it really, at times, feels super out of place, despite both of the actors, especially Bella, giving fantastic performances. There's a great example in here for how different Ellie's character feels in the show, and I actually have a physical version. Everybody say, ooh. This is the journal that Ellie has in the game. I have a physical copy because I'm a nerd, but let's read some excerpts here. Perched on an outcropping, you trace constellations in the sky. I trace the ink on your skin that covers the scars, the burns, decorating the darkness like stars. When I think about him, all I see is open skin, slack jaw, insides out. I won't let her remember me that way. I'd rather die alone. Did she die alone? Was God with her? Was he with you in the end? More than I was with him? Beyond faith and pain. I want faith from pain. I want faith through pain. What do I do here? How do I... We just started. I shouldn't have said that to her. She's going to treat me differently now. I know it. I wish my mask didn't fucking break. When did she figure out she was pregnant? Where were we a couple weeks ago? Boise? It all fucking makes sense. The throwing up, how tired she's been. What the fuck? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you trust me? But do you trust her? What should I do? It's too late to turn back. Just gotta end this thing as quickly as possible. Pages and pages of Ellie's diary are adorned with images of moths, slowly taking over as the book goes on, showing you a side of the character you don't even need to read the book to see in the game. Ellie is conflicted, haunted, and scared. Joel's death and later Jesse's death haunt her to the point of debilitating PTSD. She can't stop seeing their faces no matter how hard she tries, even when she knows it's not what's right. Even when she knows it's not what Joel would have wanted. Even when she knows it's hurting the people she loves. She's going to it, like a moth to the flame. Conflicted about her gift of life and the curse of death, Joel and the whole world put others before her. The moth is one of the key pieces of symbolism within the game. It's tattooed in Ellie's flesh to hide bites, to try and make something new over it. And yet the moth's design was born out of the Firefly logo, as we see in the journal. She can't move on. She feels like she was born to die, and now that's been stripped from her. Now she is operating like an angry teenage Spike Spiegel, pushing herself and others further than she knows she should go because she feels it doesn't matter until it finally does. Ellie's mental health throughout the game, and these themes her character leans into, are what made me connect with her so much, and what made me fall in love with the tattoo she has on her arm. And in the show, they partially get into this in the flashback episode, exploring a few of the moments that we only see in the diary in the game, but the center of it is so much less. They tie it into her growth and rebellion against Joel's conservative ideals more than anything, and then just kind of drop at the end the vague notion that the moth symbolizes death in most things. It just feels in line with how little Ellie in this show seems to feel in all the scenes we get of her. How casual her and Dina are, and how much the show feels afraid to get nasty with these characters. In the end, this problem slams into the writing problem of the show feeling so rushed, and in its wake, all that's left is really pretty forgettable. The moments that truly work well in the show are in episodes 5 through 7, which are genuinely pretty decent episodes of television. They are mostly moments that are straight from the game, and honestly play better in the game itself. It all feels more simplified, more palatable. We can't have Ellie be too bad or too angry, or how will people who haven't played the game, care about her, or care about what happens next. We can't keep too little action in it, or maybe people just won't stick with it. We can't comment on the politics behind the game too much, so we've got to be kind of, vague with some anti-conservative messaging, because what would the corporations and the government say? It just doesn't have a voice of its own to stand on. And that's kind of where I feel left with this show. Even more so than the first season, which I also haven't thought about again since I watched it for the video. This all just feels so lifeless and safe, save for a few moments that really stand out as different from the game. But even what is really good from the game feels watered down for a non-video game audience, which, granted, mass audiences didn't love The Last of Us Part 2. They didn't like how mean Ellie and Abby are, how it plays with the violence in its themes, and some people just straight up hated it because they killed Joel. So maybe this is more like The Last of Us that mass audiences want, but I can't see that either because it fundamentally, by the nature of its themes and characters, is set up somewhat to challenge the status quo. I mean, the game follows a lesbian from a communist town in America fighting against a religious cult and military dictatorship. So, by trying to have mass appeal, I think it completely cuts itself short. I mean, my sister's friend was apparently a huge fan of the first season. She got super into the fandom side of things, but she had never even watched the last episode of the first season, and honestly, I don't blame her. And I ran into a girl in a used CD store who was in full Last of Us garb, t-shirt, tattoos with her girlfriend, even more tattoos than I have, so of course, I chatted with her for a second about our tattoos, and she asked me what I thought about the show so far, and I said it was fine, and she said the same thing. So pretty much anybody who I've talked about who's seen it, even mass audience type people, just haven't found it that interesting or that engaging. The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the few video games that has ever truly emotionally affected me by its story, and that has had characters and themes that speak to me so heavily that I would want to get a tattoo on it on my arm. It really truthfully means a lot to me. And Ellie, Abby, and Dina are super important characters to me. And I don't think, honestly, anyone will feel that way about these characters in the show. I don't think people will ever call this one of the greats of television like at least the first game has gone down as over the years. And I think a big part of that is the lack of wanting to make decisions, the wanting to make more mass appeal for more people. The constraints that working under a big company like Discovery does to the creative process, and the lack of new voices taking part in the retelling of the story. It's the same story I said with my Until Dawn video. It's really hard to make a good video game adaptation, but not because video game stories are just so complicated or the writers are just really struggling that much to do something new, but almost always because studios don't want to take risks with the projects and instead, like live-action remakes of animated movies, push it to just be the biggest show or movie at the time by having a big name that everyone likes attached to it and some elements that are recognizable. Giving people what they want by giving a little bit to everyone and making for some of the most forgettable and least impactful works of art out there. It's not always the case. There are good video game adaptations out there. There are good episodes of this show, talented creative people who put their all into creating a work of art. But in my opinion, it just didn't come together to be really much of anything. And I find it hard to care. To care about this Ellie, to care about these things that have meant so much to me for years. If anything, it just makes me want to play the game again, and I did, and maybe that's the whole point of it, as a big ad for the game. Go check it out. But seeing project after project of things I love get adapted into stuff like this just takes the wind out of me. And I hope one day we can get some more video game adaptations that are willing to try new things, to have different voices, take them to different places, and that are willing to make the characters unlikable and mean. Make Ellie mean. Why? To make a political point or comment on the state of the world. These are important things that art can do, and I think it would be good for the stories and good for video game writing to have like some competent writing in anything related to it, because video game writing is usually almost incomparable in quality to even bad TV shows. The show is so simple and dumb. Naughty Dog used to be a studio that was pioneering, changing the expectations in video game writing, and now they're just kind of doing the same thing as everyone else but in TV shows, re-releasing their game for the 5th time. I can't wait to watch the Prestige miniseries Daxter and Jack, now streaming on HBO Max, formerly HBO Max. Anyway, Thanks for watching, guys. I know this is a little bit of a downer. Usually I try not to just make videos about things that I'm negative about, and now I've done it twice recently, which that gets to me. It creatively bothers me. I really want to do my next video on something that I love because this really gets to me. And this show just made me really sad. This is something I care a lot about, and I wanted to finish the series. But I hope you enjoyed this. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't. Anyway, if you do, or even if you don't, please hit the like button, comment me your favorite thing about the show, or maybe the thing that annoyed you the most about the show. I don't know. Or even if you've watched the show. Who's watched this show? I don't know that many people who have actually watched this show. Let me know if you have. And if you enjoy my takes somewhat, consider subscribing. I do a lot of videos. I have a lot of fun with this. It's a really big passion for me, and I'd love to continue to see my channel grow. Of course I would. But yeah, thank you guys, and I will catch you later. I like my cosplay. It's very fun. Happy Pride Month, everyone. Uh, you know, woohoo! This year's great for Pride Month. America's so cool. I I love America. Yeah. Anyway, watch some good movies, watch some good TV shows, play some good games. I love you all, and good night.